The massive ship landed on New Terra with the grace of a falling mountain. Its crystalline hull caught the morning sunlight and threw it back in sharp, angry flashes. Ambassador Kixithara stepped from the vessel, her 8-foot frame casting a long shadow across the landing pad. Her scales, harder than diamond, clicked softly as she moved. Each step left small cracks in the concrete beneath her feet. Do-hyun watched from the terminal window and felt his stomach tighten. He had seen pictures of the Velnathi, but seeing one in person was different. Much different. The alien looked like she could tear through a steel door with her bare hands. Her arms were thick as tree trunks, covered in natural armor that gleamed like polished stone. Her head was angular, predatory, with eyes that seemed to see everything at once. "First time seeing one up close?" So-min asked, stepping up beside him. The military liaison tried to sound calm, but Do-hyun caught the slight tremor in her voice. "Yeah," Do-hyun replied. "The photos don't do them justice." "Justice isn't the word I'd use," So-min muttered. They had been preparing for this meeting for months. Ever since the Velnathi Collective had made contact with human space, everyone knew this day would come. The aliens had been very clear about their intentions. They wanted to assess humanity's value to their growing empire. Do-hyun just hoped they would find humans useful enough to keep alive. The delegation walked across the landing pad to meet their guest. Do-hyun led the group, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. Behind him walked So-min, 2 security guards, and Dr. Lee, their best xenobiologist. The humans looked tiny next to the massive alien ship. Kixithara approached them with fluid movements. Despite her size, she moved with surprising grace. Her escort of 2 Velnathi warriors flanked her, each one looking like they could fight a small army and win. Their weapons hung casually at their sides, but Do-hyun noticed they never took their eyes off the humans. "Ambassador Kixithara," Do-hyun said, offering a slight bow. "Welcome to New Terra. I am Administrator Do-hyun Kim." The alien looked down at him with what might have been amusement. When she spoke, her voice was deep and resonant like distant thunder. "Administrator Kim, you are smaller than I expected." "Most humans are around my size," Do-hyun replied carefully. "Yes," Kixithara said, tilting her massive head. "So I have been told." The tour of the colony went exactly as badly as Do-hyun had feared. Kixithara examined everything with the air of someone evaluating livestock. She watched human workers struggling to move equipment that she could probably lift with one hand. She observed families in the residential district and seemed particularly interested in human children. "Your young are even more fragile than the adults," she commented, watching a group of kids playing in a park. "Children are precious to us," So-min said firmly. "We protect them." "Of course," Kixithara replied. "Valuable resources must be preserved." The way she said resources made Do-hyun's skin crawl. The formal dinner was held in the colony's main conference hall. The humans had prepared their finest meal, hoping to make a good impression. Kixithara sat at the head of the table, her massive frame making the reinforced chair creak ominously. Her escort stood nearby, never sitting, never relaxing. Do-hyun tried to make conversation while they ate. He talked about human culture, their achievements, their hopes for peaceful cooperation. Kixithara listened politely but seemed more interested in watching how the humans handled their utensils. "Your hands are so delicate," she observed, watching Dr. Lee cut his meat. "Do they not break easily?" "Human hands are quite durable, actually," Dr. Lee said. "We've evolved for fine motor control and tool use." To demonstrate, Kixithara picked up a metal serving spoon. Her fingers closed around it, and the utensil crumpled like paper. She set the twisted metal on the table with a soft clink. "Tool use," she repeated thoughtfully. The evening grew worse from there. When So-min tried to open a bottle of wine, she struggled with the cork for several seconds. Kixithara watched with what looked like pity. When the alien finally took the bottle, she twisted off the neck entirely with a casual flick of her wrist. "Allow me," she said, pouring wine into the glasses. The broken bottleneck dropped to the table with a sharp crack. Do-hyun felt sweat gathering on his forehead. Every interaction seemed to highlight human weakness. When a server dropped a tray and had to bend down to clean it up, Kixithara's eyes followed the movement with interest. When the wind outside rattled the windows, making everyone glance nervously at the storm, the alien didn't even blink. "Tell me about your military capabilities," Kixithara said suddenly. So-min straightened in her chair. "Our colonial defense forces are well-trained and well-equipped. We have patrol ships, ground vehicles, and defensive installations. How many soldiers? That's classified information, I'm afraid. Kixathera made a sound that might have been laughter. Of course. Military secrets? She looked around the table at the assembled humans. How much weight can your strongest soldier carry? That depends on the individual and the circumstances, Somin replied carefully. I can carry 3 tons without assistance, Kixathera said casually. My warriors can march for days without rest, fight for hours without tiring. Our skin turns most projectile weapons. Our bones do not break under pressure that would crush your vehicles. The room fell silent. Do-hyun felt like a child being lectured by an adult. Beside him, Somin's jaw was tight with suppressed anger. Physical strength isn't everything, Dr. Lee said quietly. Humans have other advantages, such as intelligence, creativity, adaptability. Kixathera leaned back in her chair, which groaned under her weight. Yes, I have heard these claims. Your species is supposedly quite clever. She gestured around the room. This colony is certainly well designed. Your technology is adequate. The dismissive tone was worse than outright insult. Do-hyun found himself gripping his napkin so tightly his knuckles were white. After dinner, Kixathera's escorts conducted their own informal survey of the colony. They walked through the streets, testing locks, examining vehicles, studying the layout of important buildings. The humans who encountered them stepped aside quickly, intimidated by their size and obvious predatory nature. Late that night, Kixathera retired to her quarters aboard the alien ship. She activated her personal communication device and began composing her preliminary report to the Velnathi High Command. Initial assessment of human species. Physically inferior in all measurable categories. Average height 1.7 meters, weight 70 kilograms. No natural weapons or armor. Bone density and muscle mass significantly below galactic standard. Fine motor control adequate for basic tool use but lacks strength for meaningful labor. She paused, considering her observations. Emotional responses suggest pack bonding behavior and protective instincts toward offspring. Intelligence appears functional but limited. Technology level approximately 500 years behind current collective standards. Military capabilities likely negligible based on physical limitations observed. Kixathera looked out her ship's viewport at the human colony below. Lights twinkled in windows where families were settling down for the night, unaware that their fate was being decided by an alien who saw them as nothing more than potential resources. Recommendation: immediate integration into collective as labor class. Resistance expected to be minimal. Suggest standard pacification protocols. These creatures appear to break easily if handled with appropriate force. She transmitted the report and settled back in her rest pod. Tomorrow she would tour the military facilities and confirm her assessment. But she had already seen enough to know that humans pose no threat to the mighty Velnathi collective. Outside, the colony slept peacefully, unaware that war was already being planned in the crystalline ship that towered over their homes, like a monument to their coming defeat. The invasion fleet dropped out of hyperspace like angry stars. 12 massive Velnathi warships hung in the darkness above Kepler 442b, their crystalline hulls reflecting the planet's pale blue light. On the bridge of the flagship, Fleet Commander Zixmora studied the world below with satisfaction. A simple agricultural colony, his tactical officer reported. Population approximately 50,000. Minimal orbital defenses detected, Zixmora nodded. According to Kixathera's report, this should be easy. The humans were fragile, poorly armed, and likely to surrender quickly when faced with superior force. It would be a perfect test of their new conquest protocols. On the planet's surface, alarms were already screaming across the main settlement of Haven City. Colonel Jae-wook stood in the command center, watching the tactical display with grim determination. 12 red dots hung above his world like a death sentence. Sir, they're broadcasting surrender demands, Lieutenant Eunji reported from her communication station. Tell them we're considering their offer, Jae-wook replied. Buy us time to get civilians to the shelters. How long do you think we can hold them off? Eunji asked quietly. Jae-wook looked around the command center. His defense force consisted of 800 Marines, a handful of atmospheric fighters, and defensive installations that were 30 years out of date. Against 12 alien warships crewed by warriors who could tear apart, steel with their bare hands. Long enough, he said, simply. The first wave of Velnathi drop pods screamed, Through the atmosphere like falling meteors, they struck the ground with tremendous force, cracking concrete and sending shockwaves through the earth. The pods split open like deadly flowers, disgorging squads of Velnathi shock troopers. Private Kite crouched in his foxhole and watched the aliens emerge. Each one stood 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor that gleamed like polished stone. They carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. When they moved, the ground trembled under their weight. Kite's radio crackled. "All units, this is command. Execute Plan Delta. Repeat, execute Plan Delta." Kite grinned despite his fear. Plan Delta was something the humans had learned from studying old Earth military history. The Velnathi expected them to stand and fight like civilized soldiers. Instead, they were going to fight dirty. Kite waited until the alien patrol was almost on top of his position, then burst from cover, running as fast as his legs could carry him. Behind him, the Velnathi warriors gave chase, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground. They called out in their booming voices commands that sounded like threats. The aliens were faster than Kite expected, but not as fast as they could have been. Their massive size worked against them in the dense forest terrain. Branches that Kite ducked under caught at their armor. Logs he vaulted over forced them to go around. "Coward!" one of them roared in accented English. "Stand and fight." Kite led them exactly where he wanted them to go. Sergeant Hyunwoo watched from his concealed position as Kite came racing through the trees with 6 Velnathi warriors in pursuit. The young private was running the route perfectly, staying just far enough ahead to keep them interested. "Steady," Hyunwoo whispered into his radio. "Let them get into the zone." Around him, his squad waited in carefully prepared positions. They had spent weeks setting up this kill zone, studying every tree, every rock, every angle of approach. The Velnathi were walking into a trap 50 years in the making. Kite reached the safety line and dove behind a fallen log. The aliens charged after him, their weapons raised, victory within their grasp. That's when Hyunwoo's world exploded. The first mines detonated under the lead alien's feet, sending him crashing to the ground in a shower of dirt and debris. The others stumbled, momentarily confused by the sudden violence. That moment of confusion was all the humans needed. Hyunwoo triggered the second wave of explosives. Trees that had been carefully weakened toppled across the alien's path. Concealed charges in the rocks sent fragments flying like deadly hail. The forest became a maze of smoke, fire, and falling debris. "Now!" Hyunwoo shouted. His squad opened fire from their hidden positions. They used weapons designed to punch through alien armor, firing in coordinated bursts that maximized their limited ammunition. The Velnathi, caught in the open, struggled to find cover in terrain that offered none. One alien warrior roared in pain as a plasma bolt found a gap in his armor. Another stumbled as explosives damaged his leg. They were taking casualties from enemies they couldn't even see. "Impossible," the patrol leader snarled, sweeping the forest with his weapon. Where humans should have been standing and fighting, there was only empty air and muzzle flashes. The ambush lasted less than 5 minutes. When the smoke cleared, 3 Velnathi warriors lay dead or dying. The survivors retreated, carrying their wounded and looking over their shoulders for more hidden traps. Kite emerged from his hiding spot, grinning broadly. "Did you see their faces?" They looked so confused. "Don't get cocky," Hyunwoo warned. That was just the first wave. There'll be more. News of the ambush spread quickly through the Velnathi forces. Fleet Commander Zixamora studied the battle reports with growing irritation. How had primitive humans managed to kill his warriors? The weapons readings didn't make sense. The tactics were unlike anything in their military databases. "Send in the heavy assault teams," he ordered. "No more playing with these creatures." The second wave came at dawn. This time the Velnathi sent their best warriors, veterans of dozens of conquest campaigns. They approached the human positions with caution, scanning for traps, watching for ambushes. They found empty positions and cold ashes where campfires had been. Captain Mi Kyung led her reconnaissance unit through the ruins of what had been a Velnathi forward base. The aliens had established it just 12 hours earlier. Now it was abandoned. The equipment sabotaged, the communications array melted into useless slag. How did they disappear so quickly? Her radio operator, Corporal Dong Min, asked. "They didn't disappear," Mi Kyung replied, studying the alien boot prints in the dirt. "They moved to higher ground. They're learning." She was right. The Velnathi had adapted to human guerrilla tactics by establishing positions on hilltops and ridges where they could see attacks coming. It was a smart tactical adjustment. It was also exactly what Mi-kyung had hoped they would do. "Team 2, are you in position?" she whispered into her radio. "Affirmative," came the reply from Sergeant Woo-jin. "Charges are set," Mi-kyung smiled. The aliens thought like conquerors, always seeking the high ground, always trying to dominate through superior position. But humans had learned to think like prey. They struck from below, from unexpected angles, from directions no sane military commander would consider. The hillside detonated in a carefully orchestrated sequence of explosions. What the Velnathi had thought was solid rock turned out to be a honeycomb of human-made tunnels, packed with explosives and triggered by remote control. The entire ridge collapsed, sending tons of stone cascading down onto the alien positions. Those warriors who survived the landslide found themselves under attack from multiple directions as human squads emerged from concealed bunkers. The aliens fired wildly, their advanced weapons tearing apart empty air while humans struck from shadows and melted away before they could be targeted. Zixmora watched the battle from orbit, his crystalline features twisted with rage. This was not how conquests were supposed to proceed. The humans should have surrendered by now. They should have been overwhelmed by superior firepower and broken by the death of their warriors. Instead, they kept fighting. "Worse, they were winning! Status report!" he demanded. "Heavy casualties in the 4th and 7th assault groups," his tactical officer reported. "The humans are using terrain advantages and unconventional tactics. Our warriors are having difficulty adapting to—" "I don't want excuses," Zixmora roared. "I want solutions. How are these soft-skinned weaklings defeating my warriors?" The bridge fell silent. None of the crew had an answer for that question. On the planet below, Private Young-soo lay dying in a crater that had once been a supply depot. Shrapnel from a Velnathi plasma grenade had torn through his chest, and he could feel his life ebbing away with each labored breath. But he could also hear alien voices approaching his position. A patrol was coming to secure the area, to count their victory and move on to the next target. Young-soo looked down at the detonator in his hand. He had planted charges throughout the depot before the attack began. Insurance against exactly this situation. The aliens thought they had won this position. They were about to learn how wrong they were. "For Haven City," Young-soo whispered, and pressed the button. The explosion lit up the night sky, visible even from orbit. When the flames died down, there was nothing left but a smoking crater where the depot had been. Zixmora stared at the tactical display in disbelief. Another victory that wasn't a victory. Another position taken at a cost that made conquest meaningless. These humans were nothing like the species described in Kixthera's reports. They weren't weak. They weren't fragile. They were something much more dangerous than that. They were desperate. The battle had been raging for 6 days when Captain Mi-kyung realized they were fighting a completely different war than their enemies expected. She crouched in the ruins of what had been Haven City's industrial district, watching Velnathi patrols move through the streets below. The aliens moved like they owned the place, which technically they did. They had taken the city 3 days ago. They just didn't seem to understand that taking ground and holding it were two very different things. "Squad leaders, report," Mi-kyung whispered into her radio. "Team Alpha in position," came Sergeant Woo-jin's voice. "We've got eyes on their supply convoy." "Team Beta ready," reported Corporal Jin-A. "Explosives are set on the communication tower." "Team Gamma standing by," added Lieutenant Hae-sung. "Their patrol just passed our position. They're not even watching for ambushes anymore." Mi-kyung smiled grimly. That was the problem with being 8 feet tall and covered in natural armor. It made you feel invincible. The Velnathi had conquered dozens of worlds by overwhelming their enemies with superior force. They expected their enemies to stand and fight, to meet strength with strength. Humans had learned to be smarter than that. "Execute in sequence," Mi-kyung ordered. "Alpha, hit the convoy. Beta, take down communications 30 seconds later. Gamma, hit the patrol as they respond." She settled back to watch the show. The supply convoy was moving through the main street when Team Alpha struck. Human-made explosives, carefully placed in the sewers beneath the road, detonated in perfect sequence. The lead vehicle flipped over completely, its Velnathi crew thrown out like broken toys. The second vehicle swerved to avoid the wreckage and crashed into a building that had been rigged to collapse. The surviving aliens poured out of their vehicles, weapons ready, looking for enemies to fight. They found empty streets and broken windows staring back at them like dead eyes. 30 seconds later, the communication tower exploded in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. The blast lit up the night sky and sent debris raining down onto the aliens below. Their shouts of rage and confusion echoed through the empty streets. That's when Team Gamma opened fire from concealed positions 3 blocks away. Plasma bolts and projectile rounds struck the alien patrol from multiple directions. The Velnathi returned fire immediately, their advanced weapons tearing apart storefronts and street signs. But they were shooting at shadows. By the time they reached the firing positions, the humans were already gone, vanished into tunnels and hidden passages that honeycombed the city like termite holes. Commander Zix Mora watched the tactical display from his command ship and felt something he had never experienced before in 30 years of military service. Doubt. The map showed his forces controlling 90% of the colony's territory. According to every military doctrine he had studied, the humans should have surrendered days ago. Instead, they kept fighting. Worse, they were getting better at it. Sir, his tactical officer reported, we've lost another supply depot. The humans used some kind of chemical explosive to melt through our security barriers. How many casualties? 14 warriors dead, 8 wounded. The humans appear to have suffered no losses. Zix Mora's crystalline features darkened. That's impossible. Our intelligence reports indicated that human weapons could barely penetrate our armor. The humans aren't using standard weapons, sir. They're improvising, mixing industrial chemicals, repurposing mining equipment, converting civilian technology into military applications. Zix Mora stared at the tactical display. Red markers showed the locations of recent human attacks. They were everywhere, hitting targets that should have been impossible to reach, using weapons that shouldn't exist, disappearing before his forces could respond. What about their casualties? He asked. Difficult to estimate, sir. We've confirmed perhaps 30 human deaths over the past 6 days, but intelligence suggests they started with only 800 soldiers. They should be broken by now, Zix Mora muttered. Any rational species would have surrendered after losing 10% of their forces. His tactical officer said nothing. They both knew that rational had nothing to do with what they were seeing. 3 levels below the city, in a network of tunnels that hadn't existed a week earlier, Engineer Dayun worked by the light of a handheld torch. She was modifying a piece of mining equipment, turning it into something the Velnathi had never seen before. Will it work? Asked Private Namsu, who was helping her with the wiring. It should, Dayun replied, not looking up from her work. Velnathi armor is designed to stop energy weapons and projectiles, but their crystalline structure has natural resonance frequencies. Hit them just right and the armor becomes a liability instead of an asset. She held up the modified device. It looked like a cross between a radio and a mining drill, covered in cables and jury-rigged components. This will generate a focused sonic pulse. Won't kill them, but it should crack their armor and disorient them long enough for conventional weapons to finish the job. Namsu grinned. You humans are scary when you put your minds to it. We are not scary, Dawn corrected. We're adaptive. There's a difference. Above them, Medic Sung Ho was demonstrating exactly what human adaptability looked like. He knelt beside Corporal Min Ho, who had taken a plasma bolt to the chest during the morning's ambush. By all rights, Min Ho should have been dead hours ago. Instead, he was conscious and asking for water. How? Asked Sergeant Kang Dae, staring at the massive wound that Sung Ho had somehow sealed with field dressings and improvised medical equipment. Humans are tougher than we look, Sung Ho replied, injecting Min Ho with a cocktail of stimulants and pain medication. We're also better at fixing ourselves when we break. Min Ho tried to sit up. Can I get back to my unit? Not yet, Sung Ho said firmly. Give me another hour to make sure your lung doesn't collapse again. Kang Dae shook his head in amazement. The Velnathi think we're fragile because we break easily. They don't understand that breaking doesn't mean stopping. Speaking of which, Sung Ho said, checking his supplies, I need to get to the northern sector. Team Charlie took heavy casualties in their last engagement. How heavy? 60% wounded, 20% dead. Sung Ho shouldered his medical kit. The walking wounded are asking to stay in the fight. Kang Dae wasn't surprised. It had become a pattern over the past week. Human soldiers who should have been evacuated insisted on continuing to fight. Warriors who could barely walk demanded to be given weapons and pointed toward the enemy. The Velnathi kept expecting them to break, They didn't understand that humans had been breaking for 6 days and had learned to keep fighting anyway. In the deepest part of the tunnel network, Private Young-Soo sat alone in what had once been a subway maintenance tunnel. He was dying, had been dying for 2 days now, ever since shrapnel from a Velnathi grenade had torn open his abdomen. Medic Sung-ho had done what he could, but there were limits to what field medicine could accomplish. Young-Soo didn't mind. He had already made his peace with death. What bothered him was that he couldn't fight anymore. That's when Sergeant Hyunwoo found him. Still breathing. "I see," Hyunwoo said, settling down beside the wounded soldier. "For now," Young-Soo replied. "Not for much longer. Got any last requests?" Young-Soo gestured to the explosives piled beside him. "Make sure these don't go to waste. When the aliens come down here, and they will, I want to give them a proper goodbye." Hyunwoo looked at the charges. Enough explosive to bring down half the tunnel system. "You sure about this?" "I'm already dead," Young-Soo said simply. "Might as well make it count for something." Hyunwoo clasped the dying soldier's shoulder. "It will count. They all count." That night, a Velnathi search team found the tunnel entrance. They descended carefully, scanning for traps, watching for ambushes. Their thermal sensors detected a single human life sign in the depths below. One wounded soldier, barely alive. An easy capture. They never saw Young-Soo's smile as he pressed the detonator. The explosion collapsed 3 miles of tunnel network and took out an entire alien search company. When rescue teams finally dug through the rubble days later, they found Young-Soo's body still holding the detonator, still smiling. Commander Zix Mora received the casualty report in his command chamber. Another 43 warriors lost. Another human position that had cost more to take than it was worth. "Sir," his communications officer said hesitantly, "we're receiving a transmission from the High Command. Ambassador Kixithara wishes to speak with you." The holographic image of the ambassador materialized in the center of the room. Her crystalline features were hard to read, but Zixmora thought he detected disapproval. "Commander," she said without preamble, "your progress reports have been concerning. The High Command expected this colony to be pacified within 48 hours. The humans are proving more resilient than anticipated." Zixmora replied carefully. "Resilient?" Kixthara's voice carried a note of disbelief. "They are soft-skinned primitives with inferior technology. How are they causing such difficulties?" Zixmora looked at his tactical display. Red markers showed human attacks from the past 12 hours. Dozens of them, scattered across the entire colony, each one perfectly coordinated, each one designed to cause maximum damage with minimum risk. "They fight differently than we expected," he said finally. "They don't try to win battles. They just try to make sure we lose them." The transmission ended. Ambassador Kixithara's personal transport descended through Kepler 442b's atmosphere like a falling star. She had demanded to see the situation firsthand after receiving Zixmora's increasingly troubling reports. A week-long battle against primitive humans was not just embarrassing, it was impossible. The ship touched down in what had been Haven City's central plaza. Kixthara emerged to find a wasteland of broken concrete and twisted metal. Smoke drifted from a dozen fires, and the acrid smell of chemical explosives hung in the air like a bitter fog. "Where are the humans?" she asked Commander Zixmora, who had come down from orbit to meet her. "Everywhere and nowhere," Zixmora replied grimly. "They abandoned the city 3 days ago, but they never really left." As if summoned by his words, an explosion echoed from the eastern district. A pillar of smoke rose into the gray sky. "Another supply depot," Zixmora explained. "The 7th one this week. We secure an area, establish a position, and within hours it's under attack." Kixthara studied the destruction around her. This was not the quick, clean conquest she had expected. This looked like a war zone. How many humans are left? Intelligence estimates perhaps 150 effective soldiers remaining. And our casualties? Zixmora's crystalline features darkened. 237 dead, 412 wounded. Kixithara stared at him in disbelief. Her people were suffering a 3-to-1 casualty ratio against soft-skinned primitives who should have broken under the first assault. "This is unacceptable. I want to speak with their commander. That may be difficult to arrange." "Why?" "Because we've been trying to kill him for a week and he keeps refusing to die." Lieutenant Colonel Boram crouched in the ruins of what had been a school, studying the alien positions through her binoculars. The Velnathi had established a command post in the old city hall. thinking the massive stone building would provide adequate protection. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Demolition teams. Report, she whispered into her radio. Team 1 in position, came Corporal Jinwoo's voice. Charges are set in the foundation. Team 2 ready, reported Sergeant Yu Jin. We've got shaped charges on the main support columns. Team 3 standing by, added Private Subin. Backup explosives are in place in case the first wave doesn't bring it down. Boram smiled grimly. The Velnathi thought like conquerors, always seeking to dominate through superior position and overwhelming force. Humans had learned to think like engineers. If you couldn't defeat an enemy's strength, you attacked their weaknesses, and every building had weaknesses. Execute on my mark, Boram ordered. 3, 2, 1, mark. The city hall didn't just collapse, it imploded. The foundation charges detonated first, undermining the building's structural integrity. A split second later, the support column charges triggered, and the massive stone structure folded in on itself like a house of cards. Dust and debris filled the air. When it cleared, there was nothing left but a pile of rubble where the Velnathi command post had been. Boram lowered her binoculars and keyed her radio. Command post is down. All units, phase 2 is a go. The counterattack began immediately. Human soldiers emerged from hiding places throughout the city. Sewers, ruined buildings, underground tunnels that hadn't existed a week earlier. They moved in small groups, hitting predetermined targets with precision timing. Kixathara found herself caught in the middle of the chaos. Explosions erupted around her as humans struck at Velnathi positions with coordinated efficiency. Her escort of 6 warriors formed a protective circle, their weapons sweeping the area for targets. But there was nothing to shoot at. The humans appeared just long enough to fire their weapons or trigger their explosives, then vanished back into the urban landscape like ghosts. There, one of her guards shouted, pointing at a figure moving between 2 ruined buildings. They opened fire immediately, their advanced weapons turning the area into an inferno of energy bolts and superheated air. When the firing stopped, they found nothing but empty space and scorch marks on broken concrete. Where did they go? Kixathara demanded. Underground, Zixmora replied, his voice tight with frustration. They've tunneled under the entire city. We can hold surface positions, but we can't stop them from moving beneath us. That's when they heard the sound, a low, rhythmic thumping that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The ground beneath their feet began to vibrate. What is that? Kixathara asked. Drums, Zixmora said grimly. They started 3 days ago. We don't know what they mean. But Kixathara was beginning to understand. The sound wasn't random, it was coordinated. A heartbeat, a war cry, a message that said the humans were still here, still fighting, still refusing to surrender. The attack on the medical station came without warning. Corporal Jinwoo led a team of 5 humans against a hardened Velnathi position that should have been impossible to assault. The aliens had established their aid station in a reinforced bunker, surrounded by defensive barriers and guard posts. Jinwoo didn't attack the bunker. Instead, he attacked the ground beneath it. His team had spent 2 days digging a tunnel that emerged directly under the medical facility. They planted their charges, retreated to safe distance, and triggered the explosives all at once. The bunker didn't collapse. It simply dropped 20 feet into the sinkhole that appeared beneath it. Velnathi medics and wounded soldiers found themselves trapped in a concrete pit with no way out. Surrender, Jinwoo called down to them in their own language. We will treat your wounded. The response was a plasma bolt that barely missed his head. Your choice, Jinwoo replied, and dropped a smoke grenade into the pit. 20 minutes later, the Velnathi emerged with their hands raised. They had never encountered an enemy who offered medical treatment to prisoners. They weren't sure how to respond to such an unprecedented gesture. Jinwoo organized the evacuation of the wounded aliens with the same efficiency he had shown in destroying their position. Human medics, some of them wounded themselves, worked alongside captured Velnathi medical personnel to treat injuries on both sides. Why? Asked one of the alien medics as she watched a human doctor working to save a Velnathi warrior's life. Because that's what we do, the human replied simply. We fight, we win, we heal. Word of the incident spread quickly through both armies. The Velnathi had never encountered an enemy who treated prisoners with such care. It didn't fit their understanding of warfare or conquest. It also meant that surrender was becoming an option for warriors who might otherwise fight to the death. The ceasefire came 3 hours later. A white flag, an ancient human symbol that meant nothing to the Velnathi, appeared above the ruins of the government district. With it came a radio transmission in accented but understandable Velnathi. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Boram of the Human Colonial Defense Force. I request a meeting with the Velnathi commander to discuss terms." Kixthera insisted on attending the meeting personally. They chose a neutral location, the remains of the city's main library. Its broken walls and scattered books a reminder of what this war was costing both sides. Boram arrived with a small escort. Kixthera was shocked by the human commander's appearance. Her uniform was torn and dirty, dark stains marking places where she had been wounded. Her left arm was in a makeshift sling and a bandage covered half her head, but her eyes were clear and determined. She looked like someone who had been fighting for a week and was prepared to fight for another week if necessary. "Ambassador," Boram said, offering a slight nod of respect. "Commander, thank you for agreeing to this meeting. Your species is weak," Kixthera stated bluntly. "Why do you not surrender?" Boram was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Around them, the broken library whispered with settling debris and distant explosions. "You mistake fragility for weakness," she said finally. "We break, but we don't stop." "That makes no sense," Kixthera replied. "Rational beings surrender when defeat is inevitable." "Maybe we're not rational," Boram admitted, "but we're still here." The conversation was interrupted by another explosion, this one close enough to shake dust from the ceiling. Kixthera looked around nervously, but Boram didn't even flinch. "Your soldiers," Kixthera said. "They fight wounded. They fight dying. This is not normal behavior." "Normal for who?" Boram asked. "You've conquered dozens of species. How many of them refuse to surrender when faced with overwhelming odds?" "None," Kixthera admitted. "Then maybe you've never fought anyone who had nothing left to lose." Before Kixthera could respond, her radio crackled with an urgent transmission. "Ambassador, we have a situation at Checkpoint 7. The humans have launched another assault." Boram smiled grimly. "My people don't wait for permission to fight." Kixthera stared at the human commander, beginning to understand something that terrified her. The humans weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to ensure that even if they lost, their enemies would pay such a terrible price that victory would be meaningless. "What do you want?" Kixthera asked. "To keep fighting until you decide the cost is too high," Boram replied. "To make sure that even if you kill every last one of us, you'll remember why you shouldn't have tried." For the first time in her long military career, Ambassador Kixthera found herself face-to-face W. The quantum disruptor array rose from the Velnathi flagship like a crystalline tower of death. Commander Zixmora watched the final preparations from his command bridge, his features twisted with something that might have been desperation. 2 weeks of fighting had cost him half his fleet and nearly 1,000 warriors. The humans still refused to surrender. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "the disruptor is fully charged. At maximum power, it will vaporize everything within a 50-kilometer radius." Zixmora stared down at the planet below. Somewhere in those ruins, less than 200 human soldiers continued their impossible resistance. They had no hope of victory, no possibility of rescue, no rational reason to keep fighting, and yet they fought. "Fire when ready," he ordered. On the planet's surface, Commander Taemin felt the change in the air before his instruments detected it. A subtle vibration like the world itself was holding its breath. He raised his binoculars and studied the alien flagship hanging in orbit above them. "Sir," Sergeant Okja reported from her sensor station, "we're detecting massive energy buildup from the primary vessel. Whatever they're charging up there, it's big." Taemin lowered his binoculars. Around him, the command bunker buzzed with quiet activity as his remaining staff went about their duties. 200 soldiers left out of the original 2,000, most of them wounded, all of them exhausted, still fighting. "How long until they're ready to fire?" he asked. 30 minutes, maybe less." Taemin nodded calmly. "Signal all units. Prepare for final assault, sir." Okja looked confused. "Against the orbital weapon?" "Against everything," Taemin replied. "If we're going to die, let's make sure they remember why." Across the ruined city, human soldiers received their final orders with the same calm determination they had shown for 2 weeks. They checked their weapons, said their goodbyes, and prepared to do the impossible one last time. Flight leader Yejin sat in the cockpit of her damaged fighter, running through pre-flight checks by muscle memory alone. The aircraft should have been scrapped days ago. Half its systems were offline. The hull was cracked in 6 places, and the engines made sounds that no engine should make. It was perfect for what she had planned. Control. "This is Phoenix Lead," she said into her radio, requesting permission for final run. "Permission granted, Phoenix Lead," came Taemin's voice. "Good hunting." Yejin smiled grimly and powered up her engines. The fighter lurched into the air like a wounded bird, trailing smoke and sparks. Her target was clear, the quantum disruptor array on the flagship's hull. She knew she wouldn't survive the approach. The alien defensive systems would tear her fighter apart long before she reached the target, but that wasn't the point. The point was to create an opening. Yejin's fighter screamed through the atmosphere, pushing its damaged engines far beyond safe limits. Velnathi interceptors moved to engage her, but she ignored them completely. Her course was locked in, her target acquired. When the first energy bolt struck her wing, she didn't even flinch. When the second bolt punched through her cockpit canopy, she kept flying. When the third bolt shattered her left engine, she used the explosion to increase her speed. "For Haven City," Yejin whispered, and drove her disintegrating fighter directly into the disruptor array. The explosion lit up the night sky like a second sun. The quantum disruptor, its delicate crystalline components disrupted by the impact, detonated in a cascade of uncontrolled energy. Secondary explosions rippled across the flagship's hull as power systems overloaded. In his command bunker, Taemin watched the fireworks and smiled. "All units, the window is open. Go, go, go!" Demolitions expert Chan Wu had been waiting for this moment. He and his team of 12 volunteers had spent 3 days preparing for an assault that every military manual said was impossible. You couldn't attack an orbital warship from the ground. You couldn't reach a target 10 kilometers above you with conventional weapons. You couldn't do it unless you were willing to die. Trying. "Charges are set," reported Corporal Hirim from her position in the old subway tunnel. "Power. Cells are linked," added Private Wusok from the abandoned power plant. "Trajectory calculated," confirmed Sergeant Minjung from the University Physics Building. Chan Wu looked at the jury-rigged device they had constructed from mining equipment, industrial capacitors, and pure human ingenuity. It looked like something a mad scientist might build in a fever dream, a massive railgun made from subway tunnels and powered by the city's entire electrical grid. "This is either going to work spectacularly or kill us all," Chan Wu said into his radio. "Probably both," came Minjung's reply, firing in 10 seconds. The railgun fired with a sound like the world ending. The projectile, a shaped charge wrapped in salvaged ship armor, rocketed up through the atmosphere at nearly 10% the speed of light. It struck the crippled Velnathi flagship exactly where Chan Wu had aimed it. The ship's crystalline hull, already weakened by Yejin's sacrifice, cracked like an eggshell. Atmosphere vented into space in glittering streams. The massive vessel began to list as its stabilizers failed. Chan Wu never saw the result. The railgun's discharge had vaporized the entire city block where he and his team were positioned. But their sacrifice opened a wound in the enemy fleet that human fighters immediately exploited. The remaining pilots, barely 30 aircraft, dove through the gap like bullets through broken glass. They had no hope of survival, no possibility of return. Their fighters were damaged, their weapons nearly exhausted, their fuel running on fumes. They attacked anyway. Sergeant Major Okja led the final ground assault with 43 soldiers against impossible odds. The Velnathi had established a fortress in the mountains outside the city, a position that should have required thousands of troops to assault. Okja had 43. "Remember," she told her people as they prepared for the attack, "we're not trying to win. We're trying to make sure they lose." The assault began at dawn. Human soldiers moved up the mountainside like ghosts, using every scrap of cover, every shadow, every crater left by previous battles. They carried weapons that barely functioned, armor that was more tape than metal, equipment that had been repaired so many times it was more replacement parts than original components. They also carried something the Velnathi couldn't measure or counter, the absolute certainty that they were already dead. Private Sujin reached the outer perimeter first. A Velnathi sentry spotted her and raised his weapon, but she was already moving. She didn't try to kill him. She just needed to get close enough. The grenade she carried was primitive by galactic standards, just chemical explosives and metal fragments. But when it detonated, it took out the sentry post and created a gap in the defensive line. Su-Jin died in the explosion, but 3 more humans poured through the gap she had created. The pattern repeated across the battlefield. Humans died by the dozen, but each death accomplished something. Each sacrifice opened a new opportunity, created a new weakness, brought the assault one step closer to its objective. Lieutenant Dong-hyun reached the fortress's main bunker with just 6 soldiers left. The position was defended by 30 Velnathi warriors armed with the most advanced weapons in their arsenal. By every law of military science, the attack should have failed. Instead, Dong-hyun simply walked up to the front door and knocked. When the door opened, he smiled and pulled the pin from his last grenade. The explosion brought down half the bunker. The survivors found themselves under attack from multiple directions as the remaining human soldiers exploited the chaos. The Velnathi fought back desperately, but they were no longer fighting an army, they were fighting an idea. The idea that some things were worth dying for. In his command ship, Commander Zixmora watched his tactical display with growing horror. Red markers showed the destruction of his positions across the planet. His fortress was under assault by soldiers who shouldn't exist. His flagship was crippled by weapons that shouldn't work. His entire invasion force was being systematically destroyed by an enemy that should have surrendered 2 weeks ago. "Sir," his communications officer said quietly, "we're receiving a transmission from the surface. It's the human commander." Taemin's voice crackled through the speakers, calm and professional despite the chaos raging around him. "Commander Zixmora, this is Commander Taemin of the Human Colonial Defense Force. I'm calling to offer you terms for surrender." Zixmora stared at the display in disbelief. The humans were offering him terms? They had maybe 50 soldiers left alive, no functioning equipment, no hope of reinforcement. "Your terms?" Zixmora asked. "Simple," Taemin replied. "Leave. Now. Take your fleet and go, and we'll let you live." "You are in no position to make demands," Zixmora snarled. "Aren't we?" Taemin's voice carried a note of amusement. "Look around, Commander. Look at what 50 humans have done to your invasion force. Now imagine what 1,000,000 humans could do." The transmission ended. Zixmora stared at his tactical display, at the red markers showing the destruction of his mighty fleet, at the impossible resistance that had cost him everything. For the first time in his military career, he was afraid. Not of death. Death was clean, predictable, manageable. He was afraid of humans, because he was beginning to understand that they didn't fight to win,